All right, buckle up because we are diving deep into the world of football finance today.
Oh, yeah.
You've sent over a whole stack of articles and reports.
Lots to unpack.
Yeah. And looks like our main focus is going to be financial fair play.
Absolutely.
Specifically, Manchester City's ongoing case with it all.
Right.
This is some really interesting stuff because it goes way beyond just looking at spreadsheets and numbers.
Oh, yeah.
It really gets at the heart of what makes the sport what it is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. What I think is so fascinating about this whole thing is how these rules are trying to prevent clubs from just buying championships.
Right.
Like, the goal is to have a level playing field where smart management and planning, those strategic decisions actually make a difference.
Exactly. And I think that's what's so compelling about it, you know?
Yeah.
Like, we all love the excitement of a last-minute transfer, right? That last-minute signing.
For sure.
But nobody wants to see a league where it's just the richest team every year just going out and buying all the best players.
Right, if it's just a monopoly every time.
Yeah, exactly. Where's the fun in that?
Exactly. And that's where financial fair play, or FFP, as you'll hear it called sometimes,
Okay.
really comes into play.
Okay, so give us the, crash course on FFP
Okay.
for those who maybe haven't been following it super closely.
So basically, it aims to prevent clubs from spending way more than they earn.
Okay.
It's all about sustainability and making sure that you don't have these huge clubs going bankrupt
Smart.
or resorting to, shady dealings to kind of stay afloat.
Right.
So yeah, it's basically a financial safety net
Makes sense.
for the sport. And it was introduced back in 2009 when things were getting a little hairy for a lot of clubs.
Okay, so that's FFP in a nutshell. But where does Manchester City fit into all of this?
So this all really kicked off back in 2018
Okay.
with these reports that came out from Der Spiegel, which is a German media outlet. And they basically alleged that Man City had been inflating their revenue and basically finding creative ways to get around those FFP rules and regulations.
So these weren't small accusations.
Oh, no.
This was a very deliberate and calculated attempt to kind of game the system.
Exactly. And UEFA took it very, very seriously.
So UEFA is?
UEFA is the governing body
Okay.
for European football.
Got it.
And they launched a full investigation, and in 2020, they actually hit Manchester City with a 2-year ban from the Champions League.
Okay.
And a hefty fine.
So for a club like Man City, with the ambitions that they have, that's a huge blow.
Oh, absolutely, and especially the Champions League.
Yeah.
That's a huge source of revenue and prestige.
So what did Manchester City do? I can't imagine they just took that lying down.
No, they lawyered up
Okay.
big time, and they took their case to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and they actually won.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the ban was overturned,
Oh.
and their fine was reduced
So it seemed like they were in the clear.
for a minute.
But this is football,
Right.
and things are rarely quiet for very long.
This is true, because just when it seemed like the dust had settled, the Premier League decided to launch their own investigation.
Okay.
Okay.
So even though they were cleared internationally, the Premier League, which operates independently,
Right.
was still like, we need to look into this. Yeah, there were some question marks.
Okay.
And in 2023, after a very long and secretive investigation, they dropped over 115 charges against Manchester City.
150.
115 charges relating to breaches of financial rules.
That's like rewriting the entire rule book almost.
Yeah, and these charges span almost a decade.
Wow. So what happens now? Is there a trial? What are the potential consequences here for Man City?
That's what's so fascinating about this whole thing.
Right.
We're on the cusp of a trial. That could have huge implications for Manchester City, obviously for the Premier League as a whole.
Yeah.
And potentially even the future of financial fair play.
This is big. We're talking potential point deductions, right? Fines, maybe even transfer bans.
It could be huge.
Okay. So before we get ahead of ourselves, though,
Oh.
I think we need to take a closer look at what the Premier League's rule book actually says.
Yes.
Because that's what this all comes down to.
Absolutely, because if you want to see how these financial regulations work in action,
Okay.
we're going to have to crack open the Premier League handbook.
Let's do it.
Think of it as the ultimate rule book for the entire league.
All right. Let's do it. So we've got this,
At least.
yeah, the Premier League handbook.
Yeah.
This thing's massive.
It's a tome.
It is.
It's bigger than a dictionary.
And I'm guessing not quite as exciting a read for most people.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend curling up with it.
Yeah. No bedtime reading.
But yeah, I mean, you've pulled out some interesting bits here from what you've
Have some really
well,
interesting highlights in here. Yeah, let's dive in.
I mean, we're not going to go through all 200 and something pages
No.
of regulations and rules.
Let's start with something juicy, shall we?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about player transfers.
Let's talk about player transfers.
Always a hot topic.
Oh, yeah, always.
Especially with a club like Manchester City,
Right.
who has been known to splash a little bit of cash.
They've been known to make some moves.
They've made some moves, yeah.
On the transfer market.
But there's this whole other side of it, too, which is the youth development side.
Yeah?
And I'm kind of curious about this, like, compensation for youth development. Because it seems like if you're a club and you're, like, really good at developing young talent,
Yeah.
it's almost like you're getting a finder's fee.
Right, exactly.
For, like, helping this player reach their potential. Yeah, you're being compensated for nurturing that talent.
Right, exactly. And so how does that actually work?
So imagine you're a smaller club. You've got this academy. You're pouring resources into it. And you've got this amazing 16-year-old striker who's tearing it up in the youth leagues.
Okay.
And suddenly, Man City comes knocking, offering him a professional contract.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, it's an amazing opportunity for the player.
Sure.
But the smaller club, they deserve a little something.
Yeah, they help develop that talent.
Exactly.
It's only fair.
And that's where the Premier League handbook comes in with these very specific rules about how this compensation is calculated.
Okay.
It's not just a random number.
Yeah.
It takes into account the player's age,
Okay.
the category of the academy he was in.
So, like, how much time and money had they actually invested?
Exactly.
Into this player.
And even whether he was on a scholarship or not.
Scholarships factor into this.
Scholarships are a big deal.
Okay.
So it's essentially a contract
Okay.
between a young player and a club.
Mm-hmm.
And the club will often provide training coaching, sometimes even housing living expenses.
Wow.
And in return, the player commits to developing his skills.
At their academy.
At that club's academy, exactly.
Interesting. So this is all happening, like, way before we even see them.
Oh, yeah, like
Okay.
on TV.
Grassroots level stuff.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's all about making sure that even if a player ends up becoming a star elsewhere,
Right.
that initial investment in their development is recognized and rewarded.
So it incentivizes clubs to invest in their youth academies.
Exactly.
Which is good for the sport long term. It's good for the sport. It's good for the players.
Everybody wins.
Everybody wins.
I like it. Okay, so we've got this compensation for youth development.
Right.
But then there's this other thing, which I think you call contingent compensation, which is like next level.
Okay, so let's take that same young striker.
Okay.
Right, he's moved from the smaller club to the big club.
To the giant.
And he goes on to have this amazing career,
Okay.
wins trophies, becomes a global superstar
Okay.
with contingent compensation. His original club,
The one that trained him up.
the one that nurtured him early on,
Okay.
might be entitled to additional payments based on certain milestones he reaches.
Oh, wow.
So think appearances for the new club international caps, even individual awards.
Wow. So even years down the line, that initial investment can still be paying off.
Exactly. It's a long game.
That's wild.
What
Okay.
is wild.
So we've got all this like kind of like above board stuff, you know,
Right.
it's all in the rules. But then there's this whole other side of things, which is where it gets a little bit shady.
A little bit murky.
And that's what these associated party transactions are all about.
Right. So imagine this.
Okay.
You've got a club owner
Mm-hmm.
who also happens to own a construction company.
Okay. I'm seeing where this is going.
And guess what? That construction company gets awarded a massively inflated contract to build the club's new state-of-the-art training facility.
So you're funneling money out of the club, essentially.
Potentially, you could be hiding losses through these seemingly unrelated businesses.
Okay, and that's what the Premier League is trying to prevent with these rules.
Yeah. Exactly. These regulations are all about making sure that clubs aren't using these related party dealings to gain an unfair advantage
Right.
or to obscure their true financial position.
So how do you actually police that, though? Because it seems like if somebody's determined to cook the books,
Right.
there are ways to do it.
Well, transparency is key.
Okay.
The Premier League handbook very clearly defines what an associated party is.
Okay.
It's related companies, individuals with significant influence over the club family members, anyone who could potentially be used to manipulate a transaction in a way that benefits the club unfairly.
So it's not enough to just be like, oh, yeah, my brother-in-law gave us a good deal on that sponsorship.
Exactly. You need to provide evidence.
You need receipts.
You need documentation, justification for those transactions.
And does the Premier League actually go through those with a fine-tooth comb?
Oh, yeah. They've got a whole team of financial experts who
Oops.
scrutinize these deals.
Right.
And they often bring in independent auditors as well
Wow.
to make sure that everything is above board.
So it's like financial forensics for football.
It really is.
That's wild. Okay, so we've got these rules around youth development. We've got these rules around associated party transactions. It seems like they're really trying to cover all their bases here.
Absolutely. They're trying to maintain the integrity of the game at every level.
It's really interesting to see how much detail they go into in this Premier League handbook.
And we've just scratched the surface.
Right.
There's stuff about stadium criteria, like how bright the floodlights need to be,
Wow.
where the TV cameras should be positioned.
It's that detailed.
Player welfare, medical regulations.
Oh, wow.
It's all in there.
It's mind-boggling how much goes into running a Premier League club.
It's a massive operation.
But I guess that's why these rules are so important.
Right. It's all about creating a level playing field.
Right.
And ensuring that success is earned, not just bought.
So we've gone through all these rules and regulations.
I've been through a lot.
Yeah, and it's a lot to take in.
It is.
Even for someone who, considers himself a fan of the sport.
Right.
But I think the real question is, why should the average fan in the stand actually care about any of this stuff?
That's the crux of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, at the end of the day, financial fair play, this Premier League handbook, all of it, it's about protecting the game.
Yeah.
Because without these rules,
Right.
what's to stop the wealthiest clubs from just outspending everyone?
Yeah, it'd just be a spending war.
Exactly. And you'd lose that underdog story.
Right. And like half the fun of football is that like underdog story.
The Cinderella team.
Exactly. And, I think we'd see a lot less of that if those clubs with the deepest pockets could just buy all the best players.
For sure, it would just create this uneven playing field.
It's about making it exciting,
Absolutely.
keeping it competitive.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not just about what happens on the pitch either.
Right, because this affects the clubs themselves in a very real way.
Absolutely, because you've got these owners, right, and they're ambitious. They want to win trophies.
Of course.
They want to splash the cash.
We want to sign the big names.
They want to be at the top of the table.
Who doesn't?
But they have to operate within a framework.
Right.
And overspending can have really serious consequences.
Right, we've seen that.
Points deductions, relegation even.
Yeah, and no fan wants to see their team go bankrupt.
Exactly.
Because they went on a spending spree that they couldn't afford.
So FFP forces them to think long-term,
Okay.
to be more strategic.
Yeah, be smart about it.
With their finances, absolutely.
But then what about the players?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, they're the ones out there every week giving it their all.
Yeah, the players are at the heart of this too.
Yeah, and these regulations actually do offer them a level of protection.
Yes, because their contracts are valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And these rules around transfers make sure that they're not being treated like, pieces of meat.
Right.
Being bought and sold without any say in the matter.
It protects their careers, essentially.
Exactly. It protects their careers and their well-being, frankly.
Right.
Because the Premier League handbook also includes all these regulations about things like medical care,
Right.
anti-doping policies, all of that.
So it's about looking out for the players as well.
For sure, it's about treating them like human beings.
Okay, so we've talked about the clubs, we've talked about the players, but what about us, the fans?
Yeah.
What's in it for us?
Well, for me personally, I don't want to support a team
Right.
that's playing under a cloud of suspicion.
Of course not.
FFP, these transparency measures, it's about accountability.
Right.
It's about making sure that clubs are being run properly.
So it's about trust.
Yeah.
At the end of the day,
Absolutely.
we as fans need to be able to trust our clubs.
And that the competition is fair.
That the competition is fair.
Right?
And that these teams that are at the top of the table got there by playing by the rules.
Exactly.
And not by, some kind of financial shenanigans.
Yeah, it's about the integrity of the game.
Exactly. And, at the end of the day, that's what makes it fun.
Exactly.
So it all comes back to that.
It really does.
So, yeah, all this stuff with Manchester City and this upcoming trial, it's going to be fascinating to see how it all plays out.
Oh, yeah.
And what the implications are going to be.
Huge implications, potentially.
For the league as a whole.
Yeah, and it really begs the question, right?
What's that?
Like, what if a club finds a loophole that nobody's thought of yet?
It's like a game of cat and mouse almost.
It really is.
Because the clubs are always trying to find an edge.
Oh, yeah, they've got lawyers. They're creative.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah.
For everyone listening, I think that's something interesting to think about.
It's an evolving landscape for sure.
Can financial fair play, as it exists now, actually keep up with all of that?
It's a good question.
It's a good question, for sure.
Yeah.
But I think that's all the time we have for today's deep dive.
This was a good one.
It was a really good one. We uncovered some really fascinating stuff today.
We did indeed.
So for everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of football finance.
And keep those brains buzzing.
We'll be back next week with a whole new stack of sources and a brand new topic.
Sounds good.
Until then, as always, keep the conversation going.
Keep it going.
And we'll see you next time.